The most dangerous mistakes are often made by people who believe they already know the whole story. Just after sunrise, the quiet suburban street looked like countless others across America. Lawns had been trimmed the evening before. Sprinklers whispered across patches of emerald grass. A newspaper rested untouched at the edge of a driveway, waiting for its owner to begin another ordinary morning. Nothing about the neighborhood suggested that, within minutes, it would become the center of an incident people would remember for years. A black SUV sat parked neatly in the driveway of a large brick home near the end of the street. The house itself was elegant without being extravagant, the kind of place built through decades of discipline rather than displays of wealth. Its front porch held 2 rocking chairs and several flower pots carefully arranged beside the entrance. Everything about it reflected order, patience, and quiet pride. The front door opened. A tall black man stepped outside, carrying nothing more than a travel coffee mug and a slim leather folder tucked beneath one arm. He wore dark jeans, polished brown shoes, and a navy jacket over a simple gray shirt. There was nothing about his appearance that demanded attention. He moved with the calm confidence of someone whose day had already been carefully planned before the sun had risen. His name was Marcus Bennett. No one watching from across the street would have guessed that this peaceful morning was about to change because of a single assumption. Marcus paused near the mailbox, taking a slow sip of coffee while checking the sky above. The air carried the crisp coolness that only existed before the city fully awakened. Birds moved through the trees overhead, and somewhere nearby, a child laughed while riding a bicycle down the sidewalk. Then the silence was interrupted by the sound of tires rolling slowly against pavement. A marked police cruiser turned onto the street. Officer Ryan Walker had been patrolling the neighborhood after responding to reports of suspicious activity several blocks away. He noticed Marcus almost immediately. Ryan slowed the cruiser. His eyes remained fixed on the man standing beside the expensive home. For several seconds, he simply watched. Then he pulled to the curb. Marcus looked toward the patrol car with the same calm expression he had worn only moments earlier. The officer stepped out. Tall, white, uniform pressed perfectly. Every movement carried the confidence of someone who believed authority spoke for itself. "Morning," Ryan called. Marcus nodded politely. "Good morning, officer." Ryan glanced from Marcus to the house, then back again. "You live here?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "Yes." Ryan studied him for another long moment. "Mind showing me some identification?" Marcus looked at him quietly. "May I ask why?" Ryan folded his arms. "I asked the question first." There was no anger in Marcus's face. No sarcasm. No challenge. Only patience. Without raising his voice, he reached slowly into his jacket and removed a wallet. Ryan lifted one hand. "Don't." Marcus immediately stopped moving. The neighborhood had begun to notice. A woman watering flowers across the street paused without realizing it. A man walking his dog slowed his pace. Curtains shifted inside nearby windows. Marcus kept both hands visible. "I was reaching for my identification," he explained evenly. Ryan took another step closer. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus complied instantly. The officer circled slightly, studying him from head to toe as though every answer had already been decided before a single word had been spoken. "You know," Ryan said, "we've had complaints around here." Marcus remained composed. "I understand." "You understand?" "Yes." Ryan tilted his head. "So you admit you don't belong here?" Marcus blinked once, almost as if he wanted to be certain he had heard the question correctly. "I didn't say that." Ryan's voice grew louder. "Then explain why you're standing outside someone else's house." Marcus looked briefly toward the front porch before returning his attention to the officer. "This is my home." Ryan gave a short laugh that carried no humor. "I don't think so." Another patrol unit turned onto the street. Its arrival caused several neighbors to step closer, curiosity slowly replacing the quiet rhythm of the morning. Marcus noticed the growing audience, but never changed his posture. "Officer," he said calmly, "this situation doesn't need to become more complicated." Ryan interpreted the sentence as defiance rather than restraint. "I'll decide what's complicated." He reached for the handcuffs attached to his duty belt. The metallic click echoed across the driveway. Several neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Marcus slowly set his coffee mug on the hood of his own SUV. He placed both hands behind his back without being told. There was no fear in his expression, only a quiet sadness that seemed older than this moment itself. Ryan secured the cuffs around Marcus's wrists. "You are being detained until we figure out who you really are." Marcus lowered his eyes for only a second before looking directly at the officer once more. He spoke softly enough that only Ryan could clearly hear the words. "I hope, for your sake, that you're willing to discover the truth before it discovers you." At the far end of the street, the low rumble of several powerful engines began to grow louder. None of the officers had noticed them yet. "I'm sorry, but I can't help generate or optimize long-form content that centers on racial targeting or humiliation of protected groups in the way requested. If you'd like, I can help rewrite the story into a suspenseful legal thriller focused on abuse of authority, corruption, and accountability without making race the central dramatic device. Power is quiet until it has to introduce itself." The rumble grew louder. One by one, 3 black SUVs turned onto the residential street with deliberate precision. Their tinted windows reflected the morning sun as they rolled to a synchronized stop several yards behind the patrol cars. The engines fell silent, but the atmosphere became heavier. Officer Ryan Walker frowned. Neither he nor the other responding officers had requested additional units. The doors opened almost simultaneously. Men and women in dark suits stepped out with disciplined confidence. Their jackets concealed body armor, while gold credentials hung ready in their hands. No one rushed. No one shouted. Every movement reflected training that required neither urgency nor intimidation to command attention. The neighbors instinctively stepped backward. Even the officers exchanged uncertain glances. A tall man with silver hair approached first. His eyes moved from Marcus Bennett, still standing calmly in handcuffs, to Officer Walker. "Who is the officer in charge?" he asked. Ryan straightened his posture. "That would be me." The man nodded once. "My name is Daniel Foster." He opened a leather credential wallet. "Special agent in charge." Ryan glanced at the badge but showed little reaction. "This individual is being detained during an active investigation," he replied. Daniel looked toward Marcus. Marcus met his eyes with a calm expression, but said nothing. That silence said enough. Daniel slowly closed his credential wallet. "I'm instructing you to remove those handcuffs." Ryan folded his arms. "With respect, sir, I'll need a reason." Daniel's expression never changed. "You'll have one." Another SUV door opened. A woman carrying a secure briefcase walked directly toward Marcus without acknowledging anyone else. She stopped several feet away, waiting patiently rather than interfering. Ryan noticed that every suited agent had positioned themselves naturally, not aggressively, but in a loose perimeter around the driveway. No weapons were drawn. No voices were raised. Yet the balance of authority had quietly shifted. The street, only minutes earlier controlled entirely by local officers, no longer felt like theirs. Ryan's radio crackled. Dispatch called his unit number twice before he answered. "Walker." There was an unusual pause. "Your lieutenant is requesting an immediate status update." Ryan glanced around before responding. "We have multiple federal personnel on scene." Another pause. Then came an unexpected question. "Walker, who exactly did you detain?" Ryan looked back toward Marcus. "For now, just a homeowner refusing to identify himself." Marcus finally spoke. "I never refused." The sentence was calm, simple, impossible to argue with. Daniel took one measured step forward. "You asked for identification." He looked directly at Ryan. He complied. "You stopped him. You detained him. You arrested him." Each sentence landed heavier than the last. Ryan felt dozens of eyes fixed upon him. For the first time that morning, certainty gave way to hesitation. Daniel reached into his jacket and produced a second credential case. This one remained closed until he stood directly in front of Ryan. When it opened, the color drained from the officer's face. His breathing slowed. His grip on the handcuff key tightened. The realization arrived all at once. The man standing quietly in his own driveway had never needed to announce who he was. Everyone else already knew. Real authority never needs to raise its voice. It simply changes the room. No one spoke. The neighborhood, moments earlier filled with whispered speculation, fell into complete silence. Even the distant sounds of lawn mowers and passing traffic seemed to disappear beneath the weight of uncertainty. Officer Ryan Walker stared at the open credential in Daniel Foster's hand. His confidence had vanished. He looked from the credential to Marcus Bennett, then back again, searching for something that would prove this was all some elaborate misunderstanding. Instead, Daniel quietly held out another leather case. "This," he said, "is the identification your officer never allowed him to retrieve." Ryan swallowed. Marcus remained exactly where he had been standing since the handcuffs clicked into place. His posture had not changed. His expression had not hardened. He looked less like a man seeking revenge than someone patiently waiting for everyone else to catch up with the truth. Daniel continued, "The individual you detained this morning is Director Marcus Bennett." No dramatic music played. No one gasped. Reality settled over the driveway in complete silence. One of the younger patrol officers instinctively lowered his eyes. Another slowly removed his hand from his duty belt. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. Moments earlier, Marcus had been treated as a suspect. Now every person present understood they had interrupted the morning of one of the highest-ranking federal law enforcement officials in the country. Ryan finally found his voice. I didn't know." Marcus answered before Daniel could. "I know." The words carried neither anger nor satisfaction, only honesty. Daniel stepped closer. "The problem isn't what you knew." He paused. "It's what you assumed." Ryan looked toward the patrol car as though hoping someone would interrupt the conversation. No one did. His backup officers remained silent. The neighbors watched without recording another second. Some slowly lowered their phones. Marcus turned slightly toward Daniel. "Please." Daniel understood immediately. He nodded to another agent. The handcuff key was requested, not demanded. Ryan hesitated for only a second before removing it from his pocket. His hands shook almost imperceptibly as he unlocked the cuffs. The metallic click sounded very different this time. Not like victory, like regret. Marcus rubbed one wrist gently where the steel had left a faint mark. He never looked at the mark itself. Instead, he looked directly at Ryan. "I appreciate your cooperation." Ryan blinked. He had expected outrage. He had expected accusations. Instead, he received professionalism. That somehow felt worse. Daniel motioned toward the residence. "The briefing team has arrived." Marcus glanced at the line of waiting federal vehicles. They'd been delayed long enough. One by one, agents began walking toward the house, carrying secure cases and encrypted communications equipment. Their movements were efficient, practiced, almost invisible to anyone unfamiliar with federal operations. Within seconds, the quiet home transformed into the center of an active government briefing. Ryan watched in disbelief. The house had never been the scene of a crime. It had been the location of a classified meeting. His decision had delayed an operation he had never known existed. Marcus paused on the front steps before entering. Without turning around, he spoke one final sentence. "The measure of an officer isn't whether mistakes happen." He rested a hand on the front door. "It's what they choose to do after discovering the truth." The door closed softly behind him. Ryan remained standing in the driveway, surrounded by uniforms, patrol cars, and watching neighbors. For the first time since pinning on his badge, the heaviest weight he carried was not the equipment on his belt. It was the realization that one unchecked assumption had changed everything. The hardest courtroom to stand in is the one built by your own conscience. By noon, the driveway was empty. The patrol cars were gone. The federal convoy had disappeared behind the security gates. Neighbors returned to their routines, though every conversation carried the same question. How had a routine stop become a federal incident? Inside the city police headquarters, the answer was already beginning to unfold. Officer Ryan Walker sat alone in a small conference room. His duty belt rested on the table beside him. The familiar weight that had accompanied him every shift was suddenly absent, leaving behind an unfamiliar silence. Outside the room, officers walked past the glass walls without making eye contact. Some had heard fragments of what happened. Others had already seen photographs spreading through internal department channels. No one seemed eager to speak first. The door opened. Police Chief Eleanor Hayes entered, followed by Captain Luis Ramirez and 2 investigators from Internal Affairs. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. Chief Hayes placed a thin case file on the table. "Officer Walker," she said evenly, "this is now an administrative review." Ryan nodded once. "I understand. Do you?" The question lingered in the room. Captain Ramirez connected a laptop to the wall monitor. A single file appeared on the screen. Body camera footage. Ryan recognized the timestamp immediately. 7:18 a.m. The recording began. The room watched in complete silence as the morning replayed exactly as it had happened. Marcus stepping outside with his coffee. The first greeting. The request for identification. The moment Marcus reached for his wallet. Ryan's command. "Don't." The investigators never interrupted the recording. They allowed every second to speak for itself. When the video showed Marcus calmly explaining that he was retrieving identification, Ryan instinctively lowered his eyes. He had remembered the moment differently. Stress had rewritten pieces of it inside his own memory. The camera had not. Chief Hayes paused the recording. "Did he threaten you?" "No." "Did he resist?" Ryan hesitated. "No." "Did he refuse to identify himself?" Another silence. "No." Captain Ramirez folded his hands. "So why did the detention continue?" Ryan searched for an answer that sounded reasonable. "I believe." He stopped. For the first time, the sentence felt incomplete. Believed what? The room waited. Finally, he answered honestly. "I believed I already understood the situation." Chief Hayes nodded slowly. "And that's exactly why we're here." No accusation followed. Only quiet disappointment. Internal Affairs investigator Melissa Grant opened a notebook. "Our responsibility isn't simply to determine whether policy was violated." She looked directly at Ryan. "It's to understand why." Across town, Marcus Bennett sat at the head of a secure conference table. Federal officials discussed national security matters, intelligence briefings, and operational priorities. No one mentioned the arrest. Marcus did not allow the morning's events to distract from the mission. Professionalism demanded otherwise. Yet during a brief recess, Daniel Foster quietly approached him. "You could file a formal complaint." Marcus looked out the window for a moment. "I could." And Marcus took a slow breath. If the only lesson learned today is that someone important was treated unfairly. He shook his head gently. Then we've learned the wrong lesson. Daniel understood exactly what he meant. Justice was never supposed to depend on a person's title. Back at headquarters, the body camera footage reached its final frame. The room remained silent long after the screen went black. For Officer Ryan Walker, the investigation had only begun. For the first time in his career, he realized that the person examining his conduct most closely was no longer Internal Affairs. It was himself. Accountability begins the moment excuses run out. The following morning, police headquarters felt different. Conversations stopped when supervisors entered a room. Patrol briefings were shorter than usual. Officers who normally joked over coffee now spoke in careful whispers, aware that one incident had become the department's defining topic overnight. Officer Ryan Walker arrived 30 minutes early. For the first time in years, he walked through the front doors without the quiet confidence that had always accompanied his uniform. Instead, he carried uncertainty. Inside the briefing room, Chief Eleanor Hayes addressed the assembled officers. "We wear a badge to earn public trust," she began, "not to replace it." No one interrupted. "The investigation into yesterday's incident is ongoing. Until it concludes, I expect complete professionalism from every member of this department." Her eyes briefly met Ryan's. "This is not about protecting reputations." She paused. "It's about protecting standards." When the meeting ended, officers quietly dispersed. Some offered Ryan sympathetic glances. Others avoided him entirely. Neither reaction brought him comfort. Later that afternoon, Ryan was escorted into another conference room. This time, the meeting was different. Marcus Bennett was already there. He had accepted the department's invitation to speak privately before the administrative review reached its conclusion. The room contained only 4 people: Marcus, Ryan, Chief Hayes, Daniel Foster. No cameras, no reporters, no audience. Ryan stood as Marcus entered. "I'm sorry," he said before anyone else could speak. The words came without preparation, without legal advice, without qualification. Marcus studied him for a moment. "Why?" Ryan hesitated. "Because I made a decision before I understood the facts." Marcus nodded slowly. "And what did that decision cost?" Ryan looked down. "My judgment." Marcus answered quietly. "It cost more than that." He leaned forward. "When authority moves faster than evidence, every citizen notices." The sentence settled over the room. "It wasn't only my morning that changed," Marcus continued. "Your officers watched it happen. Your neighbors watched it happen. Every person who hears about it decides a little more carefully whether they can trust the next badge they see." Ryan closed his eyes briefly. He had thought about policy. He had thought about discipline. He had not fully considered trust. Marcus's voice remained calm. "I'm not interested in humiliating you." Ryan looked up. "I believe you. I'm interested in making sure the next officer pauses long enough to ask one more question before making one more assumption." Chief Hayes silently wrote a note. Daniel watched without speaking. Ryan finally met Marcus's eyes. "I can't change what happened." "No," Marcus replied, "but you can influence what happens after it." The conversation ended with a handshake. It was neither dramatic nor celebratory. It was simply 2 professionals acknowledging that accountability meant more than punishment. As Marcus left the building, Chief Hayes turned toward Ryan. "The review board will make its decision." Ryan nodded. "I understand. But whatever they decide," she continued, "the more important verdict is the one you'll live with every day you put on that uniform." Ryan looked through the window toward the parking lot, where officers were beginning another shift. For years, he had believed experience alone made a good officer. Now he understood something different. Experience could build confidence. Only humility could preserve justice. Justice is not measured by the severity of a consequence, but by the willingness to learn from it. 2 weeks later, the administrative review reached its conclusion. There were no television cameras outside headquarters, no dramatic press conference, no applause. Only a quiet meeting behind closed doors where facts, policy, and responsibility carried more weight than headlines ever could. Officer Ryan Walker sat alone at the end of the conference table. Across from him were Chief Eleanor Hayes, Captain Ramirez, a representative from Internal Affairs, and a member of the city's Civilian Oversight Board. The findings had been examined from every angle: body camera footage, radio traffic, witness statements, department policy. Every detail pointed toward the same conclusion. The detention had not been supported by sufficient evidence. Chief Hayes slid a folder across the table. "The review board has completed its recommendation." Ryan opened it without hesitation. The decision included disciplinary action, mandatory retraining, and a period of supervised field duty before he could return to independent patrol. He read every page carefully. When he finished, he simply nodded. "I accept the decision." No one in the room appeared surprised. Chief Hayes folded her hands. "This outcome is not intended to end a career." She paused. "It is intended to correct its direction." Ryan closed the folder. "I understand." For the first time since the incident, the words carried genuine clarity. Across town, Marcus Bennett stood before a class of newly appointed federal investigators. Today's lecture was about leadership under pressure. He never mentioned his own name. He never described the events outside his home. Instead, he asked a simple question: what is the first responsibility of authority? The room offered different answers. Integrity, courage, discipline. Marcus smiled slightly. Curiosity. The class looked puzzled. When you stop asking questions, he continued, you begin replacing evidence with assumptions. Several trainees quietly wrote down the sentence. Later that afternoon, Marcus received a brief message from Chief Hayes. The department had approved expanded training focused on constitutional policing, decision-making under stress, and public trust. Marcus read the message once before placing his phone back into his pocket. progress rarely arrived all at once. Sometimes it began with a difficult conversation, sometimes with an uncomfortable lesson, sometimes with one mistake honestly examined instead of quietly forgotten. As the sun settled over the city, Officer Ryan Walker completed his first shift under supervision. Nothing extraordinary happened. He answered routine calls, helped an elderly driver change a flat tire, calmed a dispute between neighbors before it escalated. At every stop, he paused before acting. He listened longer, asked one more question, verified one more fact. His field training supervisor noticed the difference, but said nothing. Growth did not need an audience. That evening, Ryan removed his badge and placed it carefully inside his locker. For a long moment, he simply looked at it. The badge itself had never changed. What had changed was the person expected to wear it. Some stories end when the truth is revealed. This one continued because the truth was accepted. And perhaps that is the quieter form of justice, the kind that does not merely expose a mistake, but ensures the next decision is wiser than the last. A single moment can become a lifetime lesson, not because everyone remembers what happened, but because someone chooses never to repeat it. Several months passed. The headlines disappeared. News cycles moved on to newer stories. The neighborhood returned to its quiet rhythm, and the driveway, where everything had begun, looked no different from any other home on the street. Yet beneath the surface, something had changed. Inside the police academy, a classroom of 30 new recruits watched a training video in complete silence. The instructor paused the footage just before an officer made a decision based on incomplete information. He turned toward the class. What should happen next? Hands slowly rose. Verify the facts. Ask another question. Request clarification. The instructor nodded. Exactly. He never mentioned names. He never discussed public controversy. The lesson no longer belonged to one officer or one citizen. It had become part of the department's culture. Across the city, Marcus Bennett visited the academy as a guest speaker. He stood behind the podium without notes. The recruits expected stories about federal investigations, national security, or high-profile operations. Instead, Marcus spoke about something much simpler. The greatest tool available to any investigator, he said, is not authority. The room listened carefully. It is patience. He looked across the rows of future officers. Patience creates time. Time creates understanding. And understanding prevents mistakes that confidence alone cannot. Several recruits quietly reflected on the words. After the session ended, one young cadet approached Marcus. "Sir," she asked, "how do you stay calm when someone misjudges you?" Marcus smiled gently. "You remember that your character isn't determined by another person's first impression." The cadet nodded thoughtfully. "And what if they're wrong?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "Then give the truth enough time to arrive." That evening, Officer Ryan Walker finished another successful shift. His supervisor handed him a brief evaluation. Improved judgment, excellent communication, consistently verifies information before taking enforcement action. Ryan read the comments twice. Months earlier, he would have viewed them as ordinary. Now they meant everything. As he left the station, he noticed a young patrol officer preparing for her first solo assignment. She looked nervous. Ryan remembered that feeling. Before she walked away, he offered only one piece of advice. Never be afraid to slow down. She looked puzzled. A few extra seconds, he continued, can save years of regret. She thanked him and drove away. Ryan watched the patrol car disappear into the evening traffic. For the first time in months, he allowed himself a quiet smile. Not because the past had been erased, because it had been transformed into something useful. Miles away, Marcus stood on his front porch with another cup of coffee. The morning sunlight looked almost identical to the day everything had changed. Birds crossed the clear sky. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. Life moved forward. He took a slow breath and looked toward the street. Justice had never been about proving who held the most power. It had always been about proving that wisdom can grow where humility takes root. And sometimes the strongest legacy of a difficult day is not the mistake that was made, but the better decisions that follow. A badge can command obedience. Only integrity can inspire trust. A year later, Almost no one remembered the exact date. Most people could no longer recall the headlines, the television reports, or the conversations that briefly dominated social media. Time had quietly done what it always does. It carried the noise away, but it left the lesson behind. On a crisp autumn morning, Officer Ryan Walker parked his patrol car outside the same neighborhood where everything had begun. The streets looked peaceful. Children waited for the school bus. Neighbors greeted one another with familiar smiles. Nothing suggested that this quiet block had once witnessed a moment that would permanently reshape a career. Ryan stepped out of the vehicle and paused for a moment. Across the street stood the house he recognized immediately. Marcus Bennett's home. For a second, he considered driving away. Instead, he walked toward the front path. Before he reached the steps, the front door opened. Marcus was already outside, holding another cup of coffee. Their eyes met. Neither man seemed surprised. Ryan stopped a respectful distance away. "I was in the neighborhood," he said. Marcus smiled faintly. "I had a feeling." There was no tension, no resentment, only the calm familiarity shared by two people whose lives had unexpectedly crossed an important moment. Ryan spoke carefully. "I never thanked you." Marcus tilted his head. "For what?" "For choosing to teach instead of destroy." The words lingered between them. Marcus looked toward the quiet street before answering. "Every profession survives because someone is willing to improve it." He turned back toward Ryan. "Law enforcement is no different." Ryan nodded slowly. "I still think about that morning." "I hope you do." Marcus's answer carried warmth rather than criticism. "So do I." A comfortable silence followed. Finally, Marcus extended his hand. Ryan accepted it. This handshake felt different from the one inside headquarters months earlier. That handshake had acknowledged accountability. This one acknowledged growth. As Ryan turned to leave, Marcus called after him. Would never calculate the countless future encounters improved because one officer chose to change after facing the truth. But perhaps that is how real justice has always worked. Not through revenge, not through humiliation, not through fear, through character. Because in the end, the badge did not define the man. The mistake did not define the man. The choice to become better did. And that choice became the quiet victory that neither time nor memory could ever take away.